Hi, my name is James Hughes, and I would like to welcome you to the Harvesting Projects into Hive presentation. ATG is a platinum level Autodesk software provider. A platinum partner is someone who has the best customer service, best technical support, and best customer retention across authorized resellers. I would like to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a licensed architect in the state of Arkansas. I have 13 years of architectural experience. And for the past 5 years, I've been an AEC technical specialist with ATG. So my full time job is helping other architects, as well as interior designers, landscape architects, engineers, and contractors with Autodesk software training, as well as a number of other technical services and support. Whenever I teach Revit fundamentals, I spend a good bit of time discussing best practices for content procurement and creation. I've also gained a lot of practical experience with assisting firms to take control of their content libraries using different strategies. I hope you enjoy learning about four powerful workflows to add content to Hive during the progression of your projects. Let's talk about what our agenda is for this webinar. We are going to understand Hive as a complete content solution. This is an all-in-one solution for managing content curation and consumption. Like I mentioned, whenever I do Revit trainings, I'm always asked where they should go to get content. So we're going to lead off with the where do families come from, and then I will briefly introduce the Hive solution for those of you who have not tested or used Hive yet. And then we'll move into showing you four workflows for moving content into Hive as you go along in the production cycle of your projects. These workflows are easily learnable for your project managers, or these might be workflows that a BIM manager can take on to assure quality control. But first, let's talk about where people are going to get families. Okay, so where do families come from? As a result of answering this question in many different environments and having discussions that ranked these sources according to their pros and cons, I've developed a list. Let's take a few minutes to go through best practices for content procurement. On the next slide, I will show you that ordered list of places users should go to procure content, but all of that list changes if you are utilizing Hive. Content procurement is taking the freely provided work of someone else and changing it to suit your project needs so you don't have to make everything from scratch. If you are making and creating content within Revit, it can be fully one-third of your total contract document production effort, both time and money. Because content creation represents such a large percentage of project time, any small efficiencies in this area can have large proportionate savings to the overall project budget. This infographic serves as an order of operations. Begin at the top, and only if the content is unavailable in that shelf should you go to the next shelf down. This shows 8 stops along the way. When polled, the average Revit user will only list 4.2 of these trays as places that they procure content from. They are partially aware of the other locations, but they are not part of their procedure. As you build up a Hive database, you will need to begin by procuring content from some of these locations, some of these same locations. We will talk about the pros and cons of each shelf as we go along and investigate each of these individually. First up, you want your very first stop to be your Revit template file. A lot of companies slave over this thing, spending tens to hundreds of hours developing the template file as a one-time construct. Then they try to leave it alone for a year, and then they quickly realize that it is a living document that must be maintained. Template files require a major investment, but are worth it because of the time savings multiplied out to all of their users. Some companies put too many files in their template file. This can bog down their projects or increase the likelihood that incorrect families are used, or the likelihood that corruption is introduced into all of their projects going forward. Some companies put all their families into the Revit template file. This is obviously a mistake and is not an active curation. Some companies strip their Revit template file to contain next to nothing. There is a Hive strategy that includes keeping the Revit template file completely minimalist. I am going to advise you differently than that. The guideline that I give people who are creating their template file is to put in the content that you are, quote, almost certainly going to use, end quote. If you are not almost certainly going to use the Revit family, then it might be in the next shelf down, which is your curated network folder. This folder is entirely different than a Revit downloads folder. A curated folder implies that someone is spending the time and effort to curate content by aggregating existing families, going out and getting or procuring new content, modifying and changing the families to test and flex them, to add company standards for looks and for data, and to put their stamp on it that certifies that it's safe to use. Oftentimes, this job is given to one individual in a firm. In larger firms, this is sometimes given to a small committee. To ensure quality, this can't be properly democratized to be everyone's job. Hive can shake that up a bit, which we'll talk about later. In an ideal world, all of the content could matriculate from the bottom of this list of 8 places up to being entirely in trays 1 and 2. Now, nobody is there yet. Nobody has done the work over time to get to that point, but it is possible. And when a firm is new to Revit, they will have to go down this list, oftentimes to the bottom. Also, I had fun naming the folder structure there. If you guys have had to set that up before, you know what a pain in the neck it can be to not only set it up, but also to find things whenever they are 7 subfolders deep. And then you realize, oh, wait, this needs to be in actually 2 or 3 subfolders. The third step down, and a lot of people are kind of surprised to see it this high in the listing, is out of the box Revit content. The reason that is this high in the list is that it's safe to use. Autodesk is not in the business of assuming liability for introducing families into your project that will break. So their best virtue, or out of the box content's best virtue, is that it is safe and generic to use. They're vague enough that they can represent a generic version of that thing. The downside to this highly functional and generic family is that it is modeled typically at around LOD 200. And if you need something that has a higher level of development than that, you're out of luck with out of the box Revit content unless you modify the content to add the detail that you are missing. In fact, modifying out of the box Revit content is probably the smartest place to grab content to use as a starting point for a customized family. Next below that is to get content from a previous project. I don't know why, but I chose a picture of an elderly lady being mugged. Uh, that's one of your interns in the black parka, and they will do anything to complete a project on time. And that's the project manager over there on lookout. In an AutoCAD workflow, taking from a previous project is actually the top shelf of where to get content from. In fact, it's typical to begin an AutoCAD project from a previous project and then modify it or gut it out. In Revit, we begin projects from a template file. And if you must go find content from a previous project, oftentimes that can take a while. If I needed to find, for instance, an overhead coiling door from a previous project that I'm working on, for a project that I'm working on, I might remember that a coworker like Scott has used an overhead coiling door in a previous project that he did. And if I ask where Scott is, I might be told that he had a client meeting and he'll be back in the afternoon. And when I finally see Scott and ask him which project it was that he used an overhead coiling door, he may think it's either in 1 or 2 school projects he did months ago. I go find those projects by looking up their project number. And as I look around, I don't know, whether this overhead coiling door is going to be in a loading dock area or maybe in a concessions area or maybe in the cafeteria. But when I finally find the overhead coiling door, I need to ask myself an important question. If this door is so great, why didn't Scott do the work to curate it and place it up in shelf number 2? I don't even know if this is the door he was thinking of, or even if it might break or be non-standard content that's missing shared parameters that my firm uses. Not only did this little story take a few minutes to tell, you can see that this workflow is very time wasteful. I get the feeling that you all quit listening to me or just staring at that photo. By the way, who took that photo? I'm kind of wondering. So many questions. The next best place to get content is from a manufacturer. Some people get upset that I have manufacturers down in the fifth tray, particularly interior designers and mechanical engineers. There are many cons to using manufacturer content. The first con is that they tend to be over-constrained. If a typical door has 15 instance parameters in the properties palette, manufacturer's content will often have 50 instance parameters, and many of them will be grayed out or be associated with other parameters. Many times these will be run through a formula that determines what that parameter value will be. Often over-constrained families will be unable to perform the action that you want them to perform. I've run into this issue with a storefront system. I've downloaded a manufacturer's storefront family and been unable to make it just simply turn a simple outside corner condition. If you try to edit a manufacturer's family, that is the worst case scenario of where to start customizing a family. Unless you are simply erasing a couple of items off the family, you're going to have to dig into the reasoning for each of those 50 parameters I was mentioning and begin to sort out which ones have to be kept in order to maintain flexibility. When you use manufacturer's content, it is almost always modeled to LOD 400, and not many projects require LOD 400 components. So when you put this highly detailed item into your poorly detailed, forgive me, project, it does not have the effect of making your project look better. It has the effect of making your project look unfinished. Manufacturer's content can be bloated with thousands of texture files. I've seen that with Herman Miller furniture, where it'll have, more than 1,000 different textures or not textures, materials loaded into it, even though there may only be 8 materials needed for the furniture family. It can have unnecessarily dense geometry, and this will bloat your project. However, if your intent with manufacturer's content is to simply place the objects and not edit them in any way, then they can be useful. Then I agree with interior designers who might just want to grab a Herman Miller chair and place it in a room. That in that case, it's an excellent resource. Maybe bump it up as high as the number 3 spot in this list if that's the case. After the number 4 place to get content, you have left the office and you have gone outside for content. I just want to bring that up here now that we're at tray number 5. You are outside the office. And as the old boxing referees would advise you, protect yourself at all times. And also remember the old adage, you get what you pay for. Number 6, the next stop along the way is at bimobject. I put it above Revit City because it is a curated site that has manufacturer's content primarily within it. And in fact, it has a lot of content within it. According to bimobject, they have more than 366,000 parametric BIM objects available for free download. But the thing that you need to know about bimobject is that when you download a piece of manufacturer's content logged in as you with your email address, it triggers an automatic qualified sales lead to be emailed to that manufacturer. In fact, this service is why they allow bimobject to curate and provide their content for free. Now, that salesperson probably won't call you seconds after you download the content. That would freak you out. They may wait a while and look you up in their database first. So now you are in their sales funnel and will likely need to deal with an inbound attention around your interest in their product. If you're just trying to hurry up and get a project done, consider whether you want to spend effort engaging with vendors as a trade-off. Next up is Revit City. Revit City has saved designers hundreds of thousands of hours by providing user-hosted content free to download and use as you wish. And that sounds amazing, and it certainly has its utility and assistance to designers. But broken families provided by Revit City is the single largest source of Revit project corruption in our industry. Revit City has 1.2 million members and 20,000 plus parametric BIM objects available free to download. They also have a misleading rating system that simply reports number of stars and number of downloads. I advise people to never download content from Revit City and then bring it directly into their project. I would at least use a proxy project first, or better yet, text and flex each parameter of the object before utilizing it in your project. This can save a lot of time in realizing that content is not what you want after all. So you never even embedded it into your project if that's the case. This keeps you from having to remember to purge it later. Broken families are not created by, well, not normally created by a person with malicious intent. They are typically created by someone who is fairly comfortable in the family editor, but forgot to lock a constraint or create a parameter to fix an issue. And as soon as you stretch or change the object in a way that they didn't intend or test for, the family can break. When families break, they contribute to project corruption. Last tray. The last case scenario is to make content from scratch. It is infrequent that you create content from scratch because normally you will modify a family that is close rather than beginning from scratch. Creating a new family is technically not really from scratch anyways, because it starts from a Revit family template file or a .rft file, which has baked in behaviors such as wall hosted, ceiling hosted, and also has baked in required system parameters like mark and type mark and cost. So just to recap, in case you guys wanted to snap a picture with a phone, you also are going to have access to this presentation after the fact. But just to recap, this takes us through the best practice of where to procure families if you don't have HIVE. And in just a minute, I will show you the workflow that HIVE users leverage. What is HIVE? HIVE is an industry-leading content navigation system developed specifically for the AEC industry. Firms can organize, manage, set permissions, and ensure that the latest content is kept up to date and available for all project participants, even when working remotely. There's going to be a lot of that going on here in the next few weeks. Users can quickly find Revit, AutoCAD, PDF, images, and other file types quickly using libraries, tags, favorites, and file metadata. It's often an inconvenience when you must be at your desk in front of your computer to execute on basic user management tasks. Sometimes we're out of the office or we're standing at the user's desk and need to grant access to a tool set quickly. And for this reason, HIVE has Account Management Portal. The Account Management Portal allows company administrators to generate and regulate access to the HIVE suite of tools. This doesn't require a Windows desktop with HIVE running. It used to, but the online portal is an evolution of the HIVE offering. With the account management, you can do group management. There will often be times when access to the HIVE libraries needs to be controlled consistently for multiple users, and the HIVE group management web interface makes that process very easy. It has user management, so adding new users is a process that can be entirely done via the web interface. Any company admin can easily open the web page, add a user, and make a group association for that person anywhere that there is a web connection. And then also it has, on the heavier end, it has Active Directory Synchronizer. HIVE includes a utility that can be installed, allowing users and groups to be automatically synchronized with if you've set up Active Directory. When IT adds or removes users, the Active Directory Synchronizer tool can be set to run to also trigger those same updates in the HIVE account management system. Now, the name of this presentation is Harvesting Files into HIVE. It was named that because of sometimes that's a struggle to be able to harvest those files into HIVE, and I wanted to show just how easy that process can be. Usually a BIM coordinator will set up a file naming convention and a file pathing system that covers all the distinctions they need to make. And now, I'm sorry, I'm not talking about HIVE right now. I'm talking about using a regular network location. You have to name it according to file categories that sometimes only makes sense to that person setting it up. And then they have to document that and educate the design team how to search for content. Sometimes users can easily get lost or waste time in company standard folder navigation. Folder structure does not display critical file details or tags. The file name doesn't distinguish which content is appropriate for use in projects. And maintaining and updating and improving content libraries across multiple departments and locations could be tedious for BIM management. So we have content browsing within HIVE. Users can leverage HIVE to quickly search and find the exact content that they require for use in their projects. And then users can find what they need quickly and efficiently, and they can be significantly more productive. Partners and firms don't tend to understand just how much time is wasted in looking for and loading content into a project. Earlier, we talked about how 1/3 of a project time is object creation and procurement. Any design efficiencies in that area are going to return a very high ROI. Design models don't grow in size unnecessarily from too much loaded content when you're using Hive, which means that the project will run more smoothly and can be more easily navigated. So if we are revising those 8 steps of where you need to go to curate content for users that are leveraging Hive, what is the new best practice for those of you who are leveraging Hive? It's very simple. Step 1 is still the same. You would first go to your template file for the content that you are almost certainly going to use. Opening up your type selector is still going to be the fastest way to access that content. What Hive has done is it has taken trays 2 through 8 and rolled them all up into one. So we're no longer empowering users to run out to step 7 Revit City as soon as they want to look for content. You would be surprised how many polled users list Revit City as their second stop, by the way. This empowers users to simply go to Hive and search for curated, trusted content that already has your company's standard shared parameters and the data that you care about. And if you've taken time to continually curate this Hive system using the workflows like the 4 I'm going to show to you, you don't want people to go outside of that new Hive environment and use worst practices to find content that has all of those cons that we covered earlier. Now, there's no way for everything that your users need to be in Hive. You don't have the ability to predict every need before they happen. Users or consumers have several tools to get content. They have the ability to say, hey, I have this content already and I want to submit it for review and fixing so that it can be on Hive. Or I've just finished this project and I ran through the new postmortem process to identify viable families that should be considered for addition to Hive. And here are the 6 families that we identified as good candidates for these 2 different content libraries within Hive. This allows you to democratize the act of growing the Hive library by putting some responsibility on the project managers to identify the families that were heroes for them and get it added to the library. We have seen this as the healthiest implementation of the Hive system. In fact, the 4 workflows that I'm about to show to you are simple enough that every user in your firm should be able to push content in Hive. If you want to restrict it more in the beginning, users also have the ability to place a request for content to be added to Hive, and then someone can procure that in a responsible way and make it available when it's ready. All 4 of the processes have an automated email system that will either alert a library admin that new content is ready for their consideration, or an automated email when content is requested by a consumer. Now, it's time to dive into Revit and show you some of these workflows. The first workflow is to look within a project at the viable component families that have and save those into Hive. These are the .rfa family files that are in use in the project, everything from doors to windows to furniture. The fastest and first steps to building your Hive library will be to point Hive at a folder structure or feed it dozens of individual .rfa files that are sitting around on the network somewhere. We're going to skip that workflow and show you how to harvest directly from your ongoing projects. This needs to become a new way of life for your team members. This is something that you should empower and require every user to do, or at a minimum require a BIM manager to do in the beginning. So we're in the project here, and I want to save out this lantern here. So I don't have that file because I didn't create it. I'm pretending I actually did create it, but it's the Ramon outside lantern. And I want to save this file out. A lot of you guys know about save as library family, which will let me push that out into a .rfa file. And I might want to rename it so it doesn't have Ramon in the name, but let me select the Ramon outside lantern, okay? And then I can change the name, make it more generic, exterior wall mount lantern 2, because I've already got one sitting there in that folder, and save that dude out. Okay, so that just pushed out an RFA file. Just to check on it, we can go to File, Open Family, browse to my documents. It was the number 2, yeah, exterior wall mount lantern 2, open. We'll be in the Family Editor. check it in 3D. And there we go. We've got the lantern with a light source with an electrical connection there. So we're going to push that file that I just checked on into HIVE. So we go to the CTC software tab and launch HIVE directly from within Revit. All right, once HIVE is open, we go to add content. And I could add a whole folder, but here I'm just going to hit add files, browse to that single file. And when I hit open, it's not going to process it yet. It lists it here, which lets me make a couple of more changes. I've selected it here. One of the things that I can do is I can put tags on this, which makes it searchable across multiple libraries. And so this is a lighting fixture. There we go, lighting fixtures. Okay, if I need to create a tag, like I can put in the Ramond project name and create that. And that way, if I later want to look at all of the content that I got from the Ramond job, I can check that and it will show up in a search for that. And I can see those tags have been added there up at the top. Last thing I need to do is select which library or libraries that I need to push that content into, just one of them. And I'll hit process. And in about 4 seconds, that content's been pushed into HIVE for use. If I do a search for it, I can use one of those tags. I can use the project name Ramond, and there it is already. If I select it, I can right click and choose load to be able to load it into the project, or I could double click it, or I could drag and drop. All three are great ways to pull the content directly into Revit, which I already still have running in the background here. And you can see that it started the component or add component command with that file loaded up, and it's ready to place with the new name. So that's the first workflow, which is going to be to take a component, a family component, and add that into Revit. The second workflow that I want to show you is to save system families out in the HIVE. There are families within Revit that cannot be saved as .rfa files. Have you ever noticed that the way to get a different wall type is to duplicate an existing wall type and change it? Walls are an example of system families. Other architectural system families include ceilings, curtain systems, curtain wall mullions, floors, railings, ramps, roofs, and stairs. None of those can be saved out as .rfa files. And because of the complexity of archiving these objects, most firms do not spend nearly enough effort creating viable types of these families. Other firms do spend the time and cram the content into container projects. And the hope is that users will be able to visit a 3D space within the container project and find orderly stacks of those objects. And then they need to click on them individually to investigate and be able to quickly tell which ones they will need in their project to copy and paste over. If you don't have HIVE, unfortunately, this is the best practice. With HIVE, individual system families are saved out discreetly with searchable tags to ensure users can find the content rapidly alongside their other component families within their HIVE library. Over time, your project managers will likely develop pre-saved searches in the drop-down menu within HIVE that will allow them to quickly grab dozens of system family content to drag and drop into their streamlined project simply by pulling up a saved search for that type of project. Let's take a look at that workflow. So we launch HIVE. And if I go to add content, this time I'm going to click on this project tab. And because I have a project open inside of Revit, it looks inside at all of the system families. I reverse sort the category, and I can see all the walls at the top now. And if I held down Shift, I can select all of these. If I need to look through these and find some to deselect, I can hold down Control and click them, just like in Windows. So we'll just kind of pull some of these out. And then after I've taken a look, I can choose to select all of the, or check all of the selection there. I want to double check my tags. I'm happy with them being tagged as wall and CTC building. Double check that it's being added to the correct library. We're good there. When I'm done, I'll hit process. I'm letting 2 of these go at regular speed so you can get an idea. It takes about 4 seconds, and then I made it 25x, so you don't have to sit there and wait for all 36 walls. But yeah, very quickly, I just pushed 36 wall types, and that's about half the wall types that a typical firm is going to use regularly in Hive. If I search for this, I can do a search for basic walls, hit apply, and then I've got walls here added into my Hive library. Third workflow. What does your firm do when you need standard details? Do you go to previous projects? Do you go to AutoCAD resources? Do you go to a container file? If you don't have Hive, the container file solution that's going to be your best practice. Like system families, Hive has the ability to save out individual drafting details as discrete families that can be tagged and found in Hive to be dragged and dropped into your current project. It's a game changer. This represents a huge time savings if you were otherwise browsing other projects or old projects to locate viable versions of system families or views or drafting details. And this also allows the system families or the details to be kept up to date. I don't know if you guys have ever had old standard details loaded into a project where even the whole technology's changed. You know, a roofing product may have changed over the years since you found that. If you go to an older project, you are likely to unknowingly grab a detail that has been replaced by more up-to-date standard detail. But with Hive, Hive will keep the most curated, up-to-date content in your user's hands. So let's take a look at archiving standard details in a project. Got the modern hotel here. Scroll down, and underneath my drafting views, I only have one, which is a parapet detail. There it is, glorious. I've got thin lines on, but it's not a beautiful one. I'm going to launch Hive from the CTC software tab. We're going to go back to add content. This is nearly the same workflow as the one I just showed you. Choose project, and it looks inside of itself. Only this system family is categorized, or it has a category of views. So I'm looking for, yeah, there we go. V is in view. Check parapet detail. It's the only one. I need to change my tags here. So I'm not seeing one for detail, but I can add one. It's no big deal. Just click down here, type in detail, create. It's automatically checked. This also, though, doesn't need the wall tag. So let me uncheck that. Hit OK. There we go. CTC building and a detail. Good. Double check the library it's going into. Choose to process it. And in 4 seconds, you've got a standard detail loaded in the Hive. If I go to search for it, let's see. Yeah, we'll do, what's it, detail, standard detail. Oh, I need to change my Revit category. So over in the filters, I'm going to change Revit category, not walls. Uncheck walls, and we'll check views. There we go. Let's apply. Boom, there it is. That's the only one. That makes it easy. And in fact, if I want to see this, I can erase this one out, right? So I just lost my only detail view. I can right click on this in Hive, choose to load it. It should push it right back in. Yep, drafting views. Parapet detail is right there back. Last workflow. Many firms rightly discourage the use of model-in-place components. I don't know where you two guys fall on this one, but most firms want you to develop and use component families or .rfa files instead. This keeps projects tidy. It makes sure that the geometry behaves and allows for reuse of the content. Unfortunately, most Revit users are not advanced users who are comfortable with creating content within the family editor. Even if users have experience within the family editor, it can be very difficult modeling family objects in a vacuum without seeing them in the context of the space. And this leads to most advanced users creating time-consuming and complicated parametric aspects to families within the family editor, which will allow them to be adaptable to many different conditions and unseen conditions. And firms that allow model-in-place content typically restricted to only the most unique objects in your project. Many firms have started utilizing point clouds to help accurately model existing conditions. I don't know if you guys have done drone work or laser scanning, but point cloud is becoming a very big thing in our industry over the past couple of years. Point clouds are geolocated and they do not insert into the Revit family editor. So if we're going to model existing content, like existing handrails, for instance, we will need to create these, and most other existing condition elements is model and place elements so that we can do it right on top of the point cloud, precisely where the objects are. And it would be prohibitively time consuming to create all existing condition content within the family editor. If only there was a way to take model and place families and make it to where they were reusable in future projects. This workflow number 4 is actually 2 different workflows. I will first show you how to save model and place content out of your project as a .rfa file using an easy loophole that less than 1% of Revit users know about. And this would allow us to modify it and make it parametric in the family editor. It also allows us to distribute it to the team. The second half of the workflow is to add that content into our HIVE library for immediate use of all users. All right, so now we are on the back porch of this project. And if I go into visibility graphics, first I'm going to turn on this point cloud. So I can just check this box on the end tab. When I hit apply, we can see the point cloud. And this may be the first time seeing a point cloud in a project for Brent, but this is awesome. You need to move into this space if you're not using them yet, because it makes modeling existing conditions a dream. This is actually my house. I got ultra personal on you here, but I've done a model in place for this handrail. There's no way to make this handrail behave and do right in the family editor. And so I had to model it in place, but now I need to save that out as a RFA file. Let me turn off the point cloud real quick here. All right, so I select this model in place element here. Now, the trick to getting this out, and you can see in the type selector, it doesn't have a name because it's model in place, but I've selected it to edit it. And if I hover over this, it's just a bunch of extrusions, nothing real fancy. But I do a window across all of it, and I'm gonna make a group with it. I'm gonna name this Armand back porch railing. There we go. Just made a group. You can see the group box around it. And here's the trick. I go to File, Save As, Library, Group. This will blow your mind if you haven't done this. Okay, and now put this on the desktop. It's the only group in here, so I make sure that it's selected there. I'm going to name it same as the group. And it should have just pushed that out on my desktop. I no longer need this group, so I can select it and ungroup it and hit the check mark. And it's still a model in place component, right? But if I go to File, Open, Family, I just place that on the desktop, wouldn't it? Yeah, Ramon back porch railing, open it up in the family editor now, and it's there. If I wanted to make it parametric, I could. If I want to adjust the insertion point, I can do that. So if I go to a floor plan view of this, I'm going to do that. I'm going to adjust its insertion point. So I'll just move it from the center of the rail to the insertion point there. It still has that, that slight angle that it has in reality. Save it, load it into the project. That's the fastest way to push it into a project. Oh, can't do it from here. Let me go to the floor plan. Yeah, the coordination one, that'll do. Architecture component. Yeah, there it is in the type selector. And I can zoom in here and put it on top of that, that model in place family, center to center, boom. Go to the 3D, the other 3D view. Yeah, that one. All right, so that's the model in place component there. I delete it, and now I've just left the family, the RFA family that's been reinserted here, and you can see it in the type selector now. So that's part one of this, is to actually push out a viable RFA family. Now we're going to push it into HIVE. Let's start up HIVE. It remembers that last search I had. We'll go to Home, which will clear that out, and we'll add content. I've saved that RFA file out, so I'll point to that file on the desktop. It's right there. select it, check my tags. Tags are good. Library is good. Let's see here. If I want to create a new one, I could obviously. Let's go ahead and process this. And if I search for it, we'll do Armand search. There we go. Able to be dragged and dropped. And that was just extrusions just a minute ago. And now the whole design team has access to it. All right, so just wrapping up the presentation and demo, we have covered how to checklist and harvest component families out of projects in the Hive. So component is that 3D element that saves out as RFA file. We have shown how to checklist and harvest, and you should checklist them. You should list out the things you want to get from it. Have your BIM coordinator or the project manager create that checklist and execute on it. But we want to get system families out of the projects in the Hive as well. That's a new feature to be able to do that and get them out of container projects. We also want to checklist and harvest details out of projects in the Hive, get those out of container projects. And we also can checklist and harvest model in place families out of projects in the Hive. That's brand new to everybody to be able to do that. So this concludes the webinar, Harvesting Projects in the Hive. As you can see, this is an extremely powerful search engine for firm-specific files and content. It streamlines the workflow for all users into a single, simplified content management solution. And if either of you guys is interested in learning more about Hive, we'd welcome the opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation with you. This is a two-on-one right now, but we can get more into showing you how it works and user interface and whatnot. You can contact me or any of our sales consultants to discuss next steps. And at this time, I'm going to take a look into the chat, see if there are any questions that have come about here. Okay, so Brent is asking, to save my standard details, would you suggest creating another library for just those standard details? You can do that for sure. I see different strategies for how to choose different libraries. Most people set up their libraries within Hive based upon who they want to administer the library itself, because you have a Hive or a company admin, which is in charge of basically appointing administrators and creating the libraries that they administer. And then you have people that you would trust to curate that content. And so, you know, a lot of times it is kind of one person's job to be more in charge of details, you know, like a detail-oriented person or someone who has a lot of experience and knows what the details should look like. So most people are carving up their libraries based upon the expertise that they need to administer each of those libraries. And having a separate one for details is certainly a way to do that. I don't know if you saw just a flash on the screen there, but I have access to about 8 different libraries. Just out of the box Revit, for instance, is one of my libraries. And so we've kind of quarantined off just out of the box Revit content into its own thing, which makes it real fast to search that. So yeah, I think saving your standard details out as a separate library and appointing an admin over that would be a good solution, Brent. Again, I'm James Hughes. I hope this was valuable to you in learning some of Hive's capabilities. So this is goodbye.